Great. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Metaverse. I am Kate, one of our PR coordinators at Dark Horse Comics, and today I'm joined by several fantastic creators to discuss the creation and building of comic universes and beyond. Today, I have with me Jody Hauser, Nnedi Okorafor, Chris Roberson, and Jean Yang. We are going to have just a brief panel to talk about what they do and what world building looks like for them. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So everyone is here because they're part of creating universes. Can everyone kind of go through and tell us what worlds you are a part of?
Well, I work on Stranger Things, Doctor Who, Star Wars, Star Trek, a lot of licensed books right now. So I'm actually mostly tasked with creating new aspects of worlds that are already existing.
I think I'm in the same boat. The thing I do for Dark Horse is the Avatar: The Last Airbender series, and that was a world that was built by Mike DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, and I get to be part of the team that builds it out.
So I'm Nnedi Okorafor, and boy, the worlds that I write. I was trying to bring it all together. I've written many worlds. I've written 18 books. The work that I have with Dark Horse is called LaGuardia, and that world is also connected to my Binti novella series, which is also connected to my novel Lagoon. And yeah, we'd be here all day if I went through my list, but
And I'm probably best known for co-creating iZombie with Mike Allred. But these days, I help steer the ship of the Hellboy universe with Mike Mignola, in addition to doing various other licensed things for Dark Horse and other folks.
Perfect. Great. So I kind of want to know how each of you got started in your universes, whether that is how you got started creating them or how you ended up joining onto a licensed project.
Well, I think specifically for Stranger Things, it was actually, I had a pre-existing relationship with my editor, Spencer, because I'd done an issue of Halo, which was, that was pretty fun because that was taking a look at a new character that was in an upcoming game. But he reached out to me about Stranger Things and I immediately said yes, because I love the show. And the first miniseries we did built out the Upside Down a little bit because we told the story of Will in the first season and everything he went through. So it hewed very closely to what you'd seen on the show and just literally the other side of the story. But after that, we did 2 mini-series that dealt deeper in with the lab and some of the other kids there. So we built out a whole new sort of cast within the somewhat familiar setting and got to explore that a lot more. So we've had a lot of fun just sort of digging into the different corners that they didn't necessarily have time to show on the TV show. So yeah.
I was doing some licensed work for Dark Horse. I got brought on at the last minute to fill in on a Aliens Prometheus Predator crossover series because one of the writers involved had to drop out due to other commitments. And so I was just around, so I pitched in. And once I was working with Dark Horse, I was given the opportunity to pitch things. And I asked what they were looking for, like what did they need? I just wanted to work. And it turned out they were looking for ideas for some Hellboy spinoff stuff. And I'd known Mignola socially for basically my entire career. We've been Facebook friends for like a decade by that point. And I don't think that either he or the editors I was talking to understood just what a super fan of those books I was. Like I reread all of those books every year. And so I was given the opportunity to pitch a spinoff. And what I came back with was this really overly in-depth, like detailed thing that pulled from all corners of that universe. And so the immediate response was they're like, okay, yeah, let's do the spinoff. And then when they were looking for somebody to take over writing Hellboy and the BPRD, they were like, let's just give it to him. Like he clearly knows this stuff. And I think I was kind of given the job without even being asked if I wanted it. They basically just said, you're doing this book now, start working on it. And I was like, sounds good. And that was, I don't know, like 6 years ago. And this is just what I do now is I get on the phone with Mignola and talk about monsters. And I go do historical research, and then I write these period pieces about people dealing with weird monster stuff in that world.
Nice. The dream.
Well, I started working on Avatar: The Last Airbender stuff about a year or two after the show went off the air. And while the show was on the air, I was definitely a big fan. I was a computer science teacher at the time. I taught at a high school in Oakland, and I would hear my students talk about the show on Nickelodeon. You know, they would discuss it when they were supposed to be working on their class assignments, and I wanted to ask them about it, but I couldn't because I was the teacher, so I just had to tell them to get back to work. And eventually, after I saw the show, I realized why they were so into it. And when Dark Horse acquired the license from Nickelodeon to do the continuation series for Avatar: The Last Airbender, they called me up and asked me if I'd be willing to write it for them. And I jumped at the chance because, I mean, to my mind, I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is the best animated series that America has ever produced. It's just absolutely amazing. The way the world is structured and the way the characters are written, it feels incredibly real to a lot of us. So for the comics, the way we build out that world is a lot of the storylines that I worked on, they began with ideas that Mike and Brian, the creators of the show, had, but weren't able to fit into the 3 seasons of the show. So it's been incredibly fun.
Yeah, the way that I came to write this particular universe, and I'm kind of bringing these three narratives together because they all are in the same universe. I was thinking a lot about aliens and Earth and first contact narratives. Like I'd always been just really interested in that, and like interested in like just a different take on that. And then I saw the film District 9, and that's a film that I have a very complicated relationship with. District 9, I'm Nigerian American, and District 9 portrayed Nigerians in particular in that film in a very problematic way. And I was really bothered by the way they were presented. And but it got me thinking. I'm like, okay, what would happen if aliens landed in Nigeria? Where would they land? And then, and that led me to thinking, okay, Lagos, Nigeria, which is this huge mega city. It's the biggest city in Africa. And I've been there many times, and it's a terrifying city, but it's a wonderful city, and it's just a lot of energy there. So that led me to write this novel called Lagoon, which is basically about aliens coming to Lagos, Nigeria, and all the madness that ensues because they're shapeshifters and no one can tell which alien is like if it's a person or if it's an alien, no one could tell. So that book was crazy. So as I was writing that book, so that was the first time I created this world of when aliens arrive, this is how first contact is made. It happens in the water, and it doesn't happen with human beings either. It happens with some of the sea creatures, and what happens after that. That was the first, so that was how I created that world. And while I was writing Lagoon, I was also traveling a lot around the world and having some interesting interactions with the TSA as well, which, and both of my parents being immigrants, I had, immigrant stories are all around me. And there was one incident in particular that happened in LaGuardia Airport. And like, it was always my hair. That's where it would start, with my hair, because my hair is very long and it's big and there's, whatever. And so I'm going through the security, and of course they stop me, and I get this really, really elaborate pat down, like where they were like feeling each one of my locks all the way to the roots, and like just, they called my hair headgear, all this kind of stuff. And so then I finally got through, and this was at LaGuardia Airport, got through, and I was really angry. And when I got home, I look in my bag, and there was my little, and it was pink, and it looks like a lipstick case, but it was mace. So while they were checking all like my hair, obsessed with my hair, they didn't even see the mace that was in my in my backpack. So that just really pissed me off. And I'd had other incidents as well where I'm like, so that eventually led to this story where the very beginning of LaGuardia, it deals with someone, the main character, Future, coming through the TSA in the future, which was kind of it's in the world of Lagoon after the world has got about a decade or two after aliens have gotten used to our world and kind of become immigrants. And so that's where LaGuardia came from. So it's like, it was a lot of things. It was a lot of things that led me to kind of build and create and imagine this world.
Interesting. Wow, that's very cool. So each one is from like a different part of the timeline of that universe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why did you kind of decide to put them all in the same universe? Did that kind of just happen naturally, or were you sort of just kind of thinking about what next for you and kind of wanted to expand on that world?
It was natural. Like because when I build worlds, it's like, it's not just that I'm making a list and then filling out that list to see this world. It's like, I'm in that world and I'm looking around so I can see I can see the world, I can smell it, I can hear it, I know the histories, all of that. And so when it just kind of bloomed. It's not, it wasn't so much of a linear thing. It was just kind of like this seed that grew and grew and grew. And then my Binti novella trilogy happens like 500 years later. So it's all in the same, it's in a timeline, but it's, I know so many different aspects of this world because of just writing within it, existing within it.
Interesting. For all of you, how much thought kind of goes into world building compared to like the plot and like character development of a particular story?
I mean, I think especially when I'm looking at a licensed property and I sort of know what area I can expand into that, the world building and the character building sort of go hand in hand because, it's, if you're dealing with, say, like the Hawkins lab, there's going to be kids with powers, but what are like powers we haven't seen? What's going to be really interesting in that setting? And how is that setting going to be shaped by the different characters that they're, experimenting on in that world, at least, to be blunt. So they really do sort of interweave and go together, which I think is actually a lot of fun, especially when you're looking at doing something new in an area where there have been some stories told already.
I think I tend to approach in the same way that I approach that I loved as a kid, as a fan, right? So like there's similar impulses that drive like fanish interest in fan fiction. It's looking at, here's a map of, this is the terrain of this world, right? And this is what we've seen. And where are there unexplored areas of this map? Where are there places that we can go that are connected to places we've seen, but are familiar or unexplored territory? Or, what are moments in a timeline, but that we haven't really explored too much, but we know a little bit about. So we can go into areas where it's familiar enough to what we already like about these worlds that it resonates, but it's still new and it's something that we don't know what's going to happen next.
I think that's a great point. I think when you're trying to expand out a existing world, finding that balance between the familiar and the new is perfect. And for Avatar: Last Airbender specifically, Mike and Brian did leave holes on purpose, in the show. They did end the show with a bunch of unanswered questions. So one of the tasks that we had working on the comics was to fill in some of those holes. The biggest one was Zuko's mom, right? Like at the end of the series, everybody's asking what happened to Zuko's mom. I remember yelling that at my screen when I was watching that last episode. And the crazy thing, I mean, life is just so weird. So 3 years later, I'm working on a comic with Mike and Brian of answering that question.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I had the exact same experience where I was having lunch with Mignola, and I asked him, like early on, there was a weird alien guy that showed up in this book, Conquer a Worm. And I was like, what was the deal with that guy? And this was back in 1993. And then now I got to help tell that guy's story. So
yeah, that's one of the fun things about working in comics, right? You can switch from fan to creator, go back and forth. It's really cool.
For both Chris and Jean, how much are the creators kind of involved? Like, how much do you work with them, sort of, and how much of it is their ideas and how much of it are your own ideas that you're bringing in?
For Hellboy, it's a spectrum. So there's some aspects where Mignola is very involved and he has a very kind of clear idea, And in some cases, it's he has a very clear idea of like half of the story, and he's never been bothered to figure out what the rest of it is. So he gives me this thing, go figure out what to do with this. And then the other end of the extreme is where I am bringing much more of my ideas to it, and then I take it to Mike and make sure that it jibes with his conception of that world, and then really everything in between. So it's a lot of conversations, it's a lot of questions. Basically, it's just me doing all the hard work and Mike just saying, "Yeah, that sounds good."
Yeah, I think it sounds pretty similar. Every comic, every comic storyline that we did began with a conversation between me and Mike and Brian, and then after that, I got a decent amount of elbow room to do what I wanted. When I started on the comics, they had already pretty much finished the first. Well, they were just getting ready to air the first season of The Legend of Korra, which is the sequel show to Avatar: The Last Airbender. So we knew in general where the history of the world was going to go. But within that history, I felt like I got a lot of elbow room to explore characters and to kind of build out some of the smaller pieces of that world.
Nice. For all of these stories, you guys have sort of chosen comics as the mechanism for telling them in some capacity or another. Why do you think comics is the mechanism you wanted to go with on that?
I think specifically, comics gives you different narrative tools than you get to use in, say, a TV show or a novel. I think it's another way to explore the story in a way that we haven't seen, not just the aspects of the world building itself, but to get to use a whole other art form to look at a world, because that in itself is going to give you a different perspective on things.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's something about comics. There are things that you can do in comics, and you can say the same thing about all forms of storytelling, but there are things that you can do in comics that you cannot do in say novel writing or film or whatever. And like with LaGuardia, I knew from the moment I had the idea for that it was a comic. It was not going to be a novel. Like I could think about writing it as a novel, but it just doesn't work because it's a very visual story, and there's certain things. It's so hard to explain, but there's certain things that the story does that can only be done in comics. So yeah, I'm a very strong believer that there are certain things that can only be done in comics.
I totally agree with that. I think every medium has its strengths. Moving from animation to comics, I do think that the action sequences are a little bit more challenging. Like the fight scenes in Avatar: Last Airbender and especially Legend of Korra are so well choreographed, right? And when you move from moving pictures to still pictures, you have to figure out some workarounds for that kind of thing. But then the trade-off is, I believe that comics can be more intimate. It's a much smaller creative team that's working on them. And then the act of holding it in your hand, sitting quietly, and just having this mind meld between your brain and the page, I think that can form a really, really intimate bond between the characters and the reader.
And I think too, like, at least comparing comics to prose, is the element of collaboration that you get with comics. Because unless you're going to be writing and drawing it yourself, the vast majority of these projects, you're working with multiple creative people. And just the sum being greater than the whole of the parts or something. What did I do with that? That phrase just completely got away from me. You know what I mean? That thing.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's better than I could do on my own, because I know, I'm working with really talented people, and it can be a comfort to know I'm going to do my best, and then I'm going to hand it off to somebody who's more talented than I am, and they're going to make it better, and they're going to make me look better, because that's how it works. Whereas if I'm writing a novel, it's all me. Like, I'm responsible for every word on the page, and if it sucks, it's my fault.
And I think the one thing that's cool, because comics, you do get the collaboration, but the turnaround is so much faster than the other collaborative arts like animation and TV shows. So you actually are still a little bit more nimble in terms of the storytelling, and you can react better to changes that come down the pipeline from the main property. So it kind of is a good balance of a lot of different aspects of the creative process, I think.
Well, and the readers are so much more engaged. I in my previous life, I was a science fiction and fantasy novelist, and I would spend a year writing a novel, and a year later it gets published, and maybe I would talk to somebody who'd read it months after that. Whereas with comics, I can finish a script, and within a matter of months, I know what people think about it. It's on Twitter. They're letting me know, one for good or ill. I'm not just working an echo chamber. I'm engaging with the readers, so it's nice.
Interesting.
But it can be, it is fast. I'll say, as a novelist and writer of comics, and I am doing some animation, and I am adapting a TV series. Like it's, comics are fast.
Yeah.
They're fast, and like I learned that most because the process with writing LaGuardia was very different from writing because I did some stuff for Marvel as well, which was really, really intimidatingly fast. That is something. It's like at first when I first started writing comics, it was really disturbing as a novelist, because like it would take. My average novel takes me about 4 years. My longest novel was 6 years. So, that's a lot of time to polish and make it perfect and all that. So it was really a disturbing process in the beginning where I'm like, oh my God, I just wrote that and it's already out. It's disturbing. But after a while, I began to really enjoy that. The swiftness and needing to get things right very quickly. I've come to really, I find that cool. As a novelist, it's a great experience to have. Like just having both of those. It's been it's challenging, but I've come to really love it as well.
Nice.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I know what you're talking about with the disturbing thing, because I came from the world of graphic novels, and I think that's, I've never written a prose novel before, but I think it's the same thing. So when you're writing in comics, sometimes things that the foreshadowing is already out there, right? It's already published, and you haven't written the payoff yet, and you're like, oh my God, I gotta go pay this off.
There's definitely times when you're kind of just like the you of a couple months ago, and you're just like, why did you do this to me? Like, what no.
Yeah, I'm in this constant struggle with my other temporal selves. Like when I'll open up the notes I have left for myself, and all I have for the fight scene is like they do something clever and they fix it. But the level of engagement with readers, like, it can be a little unsettling. Like I have met people who have tattoos on their bodies of characters I've created, which is a responsibility I wasn't prepared for. I didn't sign up for like permanently altering your body. So I hope you're still happy with that in 10 years.
It's cool.
Yeah. Nettie and Jody, you guys both work in the worlds of sci-fi and fantasy. Is there a difference between the world building for those, or is it pretty similar?
I mean, I think in terms of all speculative fiction, it comes down to just knowing what the logic and the rules of the world are, and whether it's more science or magic based, it's still just knowing in your head, this is how the world works. Make sure that, like, if you're not outright saying what the rules are, you stay within them so that the readers can at least get a sense of how things are supposed to work, and just make sure that the logic of everything that happens follows through.
Yeah. It's God, I don't even know how to it's science fiction and fantasy, like I don't see them as separate, like to me, and I know there are people who do see them as very, very separate. We should never touch each other, but like, well, it really, for me, like from a cultural standpoint, a lot of the things, because I take a lot from, for example, Nigerian culture, and in Nigerian culture, the mundane and the fantastical or the mystical are intertwined all the time. So like, let's say if you take that worldview and then you add it to, you jump it into the future, you're going to have mystical things happening in a futuristic setting. And so for me, like fantasy and science fiction, they're not separate, they're not necessarily separate things in my mind. Like they coexist easily, comfortably. There's no conflict. I mean, you can have a hard science fiction story that doesn't have any mystical elements, but to me, that's almost it's foreign to me. That's a foreign thing. Because for me, the world is a magical place. So yeah, so it's like, yeah, so they're comfortable. Like it's not something that, so in writing both of them, it's the same, if that makes sense. I don't want to say that science fiction and fantasy are the same because they're not, but like, I don't even make that distinction between the two. I think the way that I view genre is not, it's hard to explain.
No, that's why I like the term speculative fiction, because
yes,
it's the story of what if the world was this way, and there's like so many different takes on that, but it all falls under the same like larger umbrella for me.
Yes, that. Well, thank you.
No worries.
And then I guess kind of as far as general world building goes, and this one's for everybody, how do you balance kind of telling those like human individual stories while also exploring like a whole universe that they inhabit?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it all has to come down to character. And I think one of the fun things with building out worlds is taking a look at the characters you're working with and figuring out what in the world can go the absolute worst for them to have to deal with. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of it does start with character, at least for me.
To approach it very similar to games, right? So like there's rules that are established, there's a world, you have entire source books information, but the only thing that's really germane at the moment is what our characters are interacting with, right? So you're following characters through an established landscape, and there may be a really cool big thing on the other side of that wall, but if it's not important to what the character is doing right now, we're not going to go in there. Like, so that is off the map. So yeah, you just follow the characters through the world, and then the world will take care of itself.
Yeah, I think that's my approach too. It always has to start with the character, and the world is like a way in which the character can express themselves. I think what Jody said is exactly right. Like a lot of times when you're writing, you're basically trying to be the most jerkish god you can to your characters, right? That's like your whole job.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with everyone on this. It really, it starts with character. You know, you're experiencing the world through the character's point of view, and that affects everything. But at the same time, and I do this, and it doesn't make it into what I'm writing, but there are times where I just want to explore the world. Like I just want to just prance around and touch all the butterflies, do things, you know, and just have fun in it. And there were like video games that I used to look for video games where like I didn't want a purpose, I didn't want a plot. I just wanted to be able to run around in the world and kick the grass and roll around and whatever, and have no point. So there's value in that too when it comes to world building, just enjoying the world, but that doesn't make it into the actual story. Like in terms of the story itself, yeah, it's all, for me at least, it's always character first. Experience, like if there's a tree there, one character is going to see that tree differently than another character, and that's what's important to the story. But yeah, enjoying the world is still important to me.
I mean, that's a really good point, though, that, you know, the worlds that we're building are going to be perceived through the characters' biases. So it's kind of not just what does the world look like as a whole, it's how does everyone see the world, and how does what they've been through impact how they and then the reader see the world.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid we have to wrap up, which is disappointing because this was a very interesting conversation. But how about we all go around and say where people can find you in some of your latest projects?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Jody_Hauser, and on Instagram at Mind Eclipse. And coming out this fall and winter, I have Stranger Things and Dungeons and Dragon that I co-wrote with Jim Zub, Stranger Things Summer Camp, and then in December, Critical Role Vox Machina Origins Volume 3.
I'm on Twitter at Chris_Robertson, where I occasionally pop up and talk about Star Trek or a cartoon that I recently enjoyed. My most recent thing that came out is probably Witchfinder: Reign of Darkness with Chris Mitten, which is a collected volume of a miniseries that happened earlier this year. And future work, I can't remember what I'm working on.
You can find me on Twitter at Nettie, Nnedi. Been there since 2008, so that's how I got that. And and on Instagram as well, Nettie Okorafor on Instagram, and then also on Facebook. I just had my middle grade fantasy novel Ikenga just came out. That's with Penguin Books, and then I have a novella called Remote Control. It's a science fiction novella coming out in January.
So I'm at my name. I'm at Jinlun Yang on both Twitter and on Instagram. I also have jinlunyang.com, which is my website. Although I don't remember the last time I updated that, so maybe go visit that. The last book that came out for me was this, which I did with Gurihiru. It's a collection of the very first storyline of Avatar that we did together. Gurihiru, they're amazing artists, among the best working in the industry. And we also did this one for DC Comics recently.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thank you guys all for being here. We're going to finish up and I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.